If you aren't already familiar with the Federal Reserve, think of it like a bank for banks. That's right, Bank of America has a bank that it can go to when it needs money, just like you do when you max out your Robinhood margin account on Tesla puts. It's an institution made up of both private and public elements, with oversight by a governing body led by a chair, presently occupied by our boy Jerome Powell. The Federal Reserve Board members are nominated by the President and then confirmed by the Senate, similar to the method by which justices are appointed to the Supreme Court. The role of the Federal Reserve is to control the supply of US dollars, determining how much money there is in circulation. The Fed prints and destroys billions of dollars a day. Well, it doesn't exactly print all the money it creates. Many of these new dollars purely exist digitally, when the Federal Reserve simply loans money to financial institutions by instructing them to report an increase of cash in their balance sheets. So why does the Federal Reserve matter? I'm sure that by now you must have heard about all of those stimulus checks going out, and a lot of you are already probably counting your stacks of blue hundreds. Okay, hold on a second. Where is this money actually coming from? There's been so much debate in this current election cycle regarding the lack of ability to pay for Medicare for all or canceling student debt. So how come we can just hand out a $1,200 check to hundreds of millions of Americans, with so much more to come? The United States government engages heavily in deficit spending, meaning that in a given year, we're spending more money than we are collecting in revenue. Well, how are we able to spend more money than we have? That's when the United States Treasury goes to the Federal Reserve with their hands out. Just like you go to your bank when your broker margin calls you after your Tesla puts lose 90% of value because you never learned to not bet against the Musk. The Treasury issues debt, called Treasury bonds, that the Federal Reserve then purchases in exchange for cold, hard cash. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but never mind that. The Federal Reserve is a direct buyer for Treasury debt, which allows the Treasury to fill their coffers as fast as Jerome Powell can turn the crank on his printing press. Okay, wait, what about all those huge companies that suddenly have zero cash flow? Under normal circumstances, movie theaters, large dine-in chain restaurants, amusement parks, and practically the entire leisure industry that employs 17 million people in the United States should be going under right now. So why isn't that happening? So this is where the Federal Reserve really matters, beyond allowing Congress to hand out pity checks to stop you all from running out and setting cars on fire. The Federal Reserve is engaging in market intervention never seen before in the history of the United States. Even at the height of the great financial crisis, we never saw anything close to this level of direct support. In 2008, the Federal Reserve helped the government prevent the mortgage and finance sector from going under by purchasing mortgage-backed securities. What's happening right now is like 2008 times 1000. Instead of only lending support to the finance industry, the Federal Reserve is buying corporate debt across the board, since cash flows have been interrupted in every economic sector on a scale not seen in any of our lifetimes. Corporations need to be able to freely access money to keep up with their obligations. They have to meet payments on all of their liabilities, such as their debt obligations, mortgages, and payroll. The Fed isn't just buying the nice AAA rated bonds either, but even shares of high-yield junk bond ETFs. After the Federal Reserve announced the shocking news of its foray into riskier credit markets, the biggest high-yield bond ETF jumped by more than 7%. High-yield corporate debt is issued by companies that are deemed to be riskier investments, and its corresponding exchange-traded fund tracks the market for such debt. Essentially, the Fed is intervening in a market that no self-respecting institutional investor would want to touch with a 10-foot pole in economic conditions like today, which is exactly why the Fed is taking this action. To accomplish this, the Fed assembled a variety of special-purpose vehicles, or facilities, just for the purchase of private assets. These terms are just fancy names for subsidiaries that have isolated financial risk from the Federal Reserve. The names of these entities aren't really important, but their collective goal is to prevent both small and large businesses from going under. Will the Fed be successful in preventing the economic apocalypse and collapse of the global financial system? I'm sure we'll find out before the year's up.